The specification letter that Josiah Vane sent to the marriage agency in St. Paul was 4 sentences long, and every one of them was a subtraction. He wanted a wife who was plain. Because plain women, he had reasoned, stayed. He wanted one who was thrifty, who kept no trade of her own, and who carried, in his exact and careful phrase, no notions and no curiosity. A photograph, he had decided, was cheaper than a journey and told no lies. He was wrong on the second count, and he would spend 40 years being glad of it. The woman who developed the tintype he chose his bride from smiled when she read the words "no curiosity," because she had photographed his particular brand of certainty before, and she knew exactly how it tended to end. This is the story of how a man who ordered a wife from a picture got the one thing his order had been written to keep out. He got somebody who could see. Dakota Territory in the autumn of 1883 was a place where the arithmetic ran against a lonely man in a very specific direction. The great Dakota boom had emptied the eastern cities onto the plains, and the boom, being made mostly of young men chasing free acres, counted them out at 9 single men for every marriageable woman in the county. Josiah Vane was 38. He held 480 proved-up acres of good river bottomland, and he had done the sum often enough to know the odds were not a thing a shy man could outwait. So he did what a practical man does with a shortage. He ordered around it. His letter itemized a wife as precisely as his ledger itemized seed. No trade, because a trade meant a woman's attention was already spoken for. No notions, because notions cost money and made a quiet house loud. No curiosity, because curiosity asked a man questions he might not care to answer. For his $18, he received a small tintype of a fair, still-faced young woman and a line of clerk's handwriting giving her name and her willingness. He propped the picture against his lamp and felt, for the first time in years, that a thing had been settled. He did not know, and here the letter's thrift became its own private joke, that the tintype had been made 200 miles east by the only woman with a camera in the whole of the territory. Her name was Cordelia. She was 26, and she was the orphan daughter of a rail survey photographer who had taught her to fix a moment onto glass so faithfully it could never afterward be argued with. She had taken the still-faced girl's likeness as a favor, and she knew 2 things Josiah did not. She knew the girl was already half promised to a traveling drummer with a gold tooth and a wagon of patent tonic. And she knew, from the flat little sentences the agency had copied out along with the order, that the man at the far end of the rail line had described, in loving detail, the house he meant to build for a wife, and had not spent one word describing the wife he wanted living inside it. The still-faced girl eloped east with her drummer before the first hard frost. This left the agency holding $18 it had already spent and an order it could no longer fill, and it left Cordelia with a letter in her hand and a question she had been circling for a month. In the end, she answered the order herself. She did not write ahead to explain. She packed a Bellows field camera, a wooden tripod, a plate case of dry glass, and one good traveling dress the deep color of river water, and she bought a ticket west. Josiah met the train with the tintype in his coat pocket, like a man meeting a stranger with a description in his hand. When the cars emptied, he lifted the little picture to shoulder height and began comparing it, face by face, against the women coming down the iron steps. Cordelia stepped down nearly last, a plate case in one hand and the tall folded camera under her arm, and she watched him hold a photograph of another woman up against her own face and slowly understand that the 2 did not match. She did not apologize. She had spent her whole life on the far side of the lens, and she had no practice at being sorry for being the one who made the picture rather than the one inside it. "You are not her," he said. "No, I am the one who took her likeness. She has married a man with a gold tooth. You may have your $18 back, or you may have me, but you cannot have the girl in the picture, because she was never for sale, and neither am I." They settled terms on the depot boardwalk while two matrons whispered behind their gloves, and the land agent leaned so far out of the ticket window he nearly pitched into the street. "3 of them," she said, "and then you may decide. The corner of the house with the north light is mine, and my chemicals and my plates are nobody's affair but my own. My camera is never sold to cover a debt, not yours and not the country's, and I keep the right to say no to any question you ask me without owing you the reason." Josiah, who had asked for a woman with no notions and been sent one who arrived carrying a case full of them, discovered he had agreed to all 3 before he quite finished deciding to. He built her a lean-to off the north wall that first month with a long window of good glass, and when the crew asked what it was, for he called it a spring house, because a spring house was a thing a sensible man built, and a dark room was a thing the town would chew on for a season. Cordelia let him keep the lie and hung her plates to dry in there regardless. Across that first year she photographed the homestead as other women keep a diary, the sod broken and in greening, the fence climbing post by post, the wheat rising to his knee and then his shoulder, the light shifting from the long gold of harvest to the flat white of a winter noon. Josiah began carrying a few of her prints folded in his coat, and he pretended not to, and he pretended it badly. In February he took a fever that held him a week in the bed by the stove, and Cordelia developed her glass at the table beside him through the worst of it, so that each time he swam up out of the heat there was a lamp lit, the clean chemical smell of her work, and a fresh square of the yard held to the light, waiting for him to wake and look. The town had settled on calling her the picture woman, half in mockery it never learned about that week. The valley's trouble had a name, and the name wore a bowler hat. A townsite speculator and the ring of men he paid had begun taking up the river homesteads one claim at a time, not with guns, which were loud and illegal, but with sworn testimony, which was quiet and lawful. At the land office they swore this quarter, and that one had sat empty, unbroken, never lived upon, and against a rich man's oath a homesteader had only his own, which the office weighed it rather less. At the settlers' meeting the men sat grim, and one of them, meaning only to lift the mood, ribbed Josiah that his wife would surely save them all with her little box of light, while the speculator ate the valley one claim at a time. Josiah went home stung, and he did a foolish thing. Across the dark kitchen he asked it cold, "Did you answer a stranger's order for the good land under my name," he said, "or for the man standing on top of it?" Cordelia looked at him a long moment, then declined, as was her stated right, to give the question any answer at all. The house went silent for a week, a different silence than the fever week, and a worse one. What Josiah had not understood, and the speculator even less, was the nature of the thing quietly drying in the north-lit room. The land office decided a claim dispute on proof of improvement and residence, and testimony was only ever one man's word against a richer man's. But a photographic plate is a witness of another order entirely. It cannot be paid. It cannot be frightened. It cannot be persuaded to forget. And a good plate dates itself, if you know how to read it, by the height of the standing wheat and the low angle of the sun. Cordelia had a full year of dated plates of that valley. At the public hearing, the speculators' men swore, one after another, that the river claims had lain empty and unbroken through the whole season. Then Cordelia laid her plates and prints out across the land agent's table and read the valley back to the room. "This is the Harmon place in May," she said, setting the prints down one at a time. "Here is their fence in June, the posts still bleeding sap. Here is their wheat in August standing to a grown man's chest. Every plate was made months before these gentlemen swear the ground was ever broken. The season is on the glass. You can count it in the wheat. Every family the men had sworn did not exist stood there in the prints, squarely in front of the doors those same men had claimed were never built. The case died on the table in broad daylight, and the patents held." Then Josiah stood up in front of the entire land office and said his piece. "My order asked for a wife with no trade and no notions," he said. "Her one notion, a wooden box that catches light and holds on to it, has just saved every roof in this township, my own among them. I would like that entered into the record." He said it plainly, as he said everything, and the room understood that the plainest man in the valley had just paid his wife the loudest compliment any of them had heard spoken aloud. That night he asked her again, gently this time, why she had answered a stranger's order at all. "Yours was the first letter I ever read," she said, "that described the house a man meant to build for a wife. Down to the north window in the fall of the afternoon light, and never once described the wife he wanted to find waiting inside it. A man who thinks that hard about where the light will land is worth the train fare to go and see." They married in October of 1883. Her great plate of the township's founding families hung in the county courthouse for 40 years. And men took off their hats passing it without quite knowing why. Josiah Vane died in 1921 and Cordelia in 1929, and they were buried side by side on the rise above the old claim, where she had always insisted the light was good the whole afternoon long. He had chosen a wife from a picture because it was cheaper than looking. It cost him nothing at all to learn that the woman who made the pictures could see the one thing he never had, which is that a home is not the thing you order. It is the thing you can prove in plain daylight that you built together. If this story stayed with you, tell me down in the comments, what was the moment you knew Cordelia was never going to be anything the man had ordered? And if you would like another, stay with me, and I will tell you about the widow who bid $1 on a burned-out claim every rancher in the county had already written off for dead.